This week, we finish our conversation with Stephen J. Spear. You can hear the first part of our interview in episode 41. This week, Stephen talks about two papers that he recently released which discuss the flow of work as it relates to accelerating innovation and succeeding in periods of abrupt change. Stephen is the author of the book The High Velocity Edge and is a multiple Shingo Research Prize winner. He helped develop and deploy the Alcoa business system. He's a senior lecturer at MIT Sloan School of Management and is a senior fellow at the Institute for Healthcare Improvement. He is also a founding member of the consulting firm built on the tenets of his book. Here's part two of our interview. Stephen, you had shared with me two papers that you wrote recently about accelerating innovation. We've had a generational year in the last year of COVID and getting from the concept of identifying the disease to inoculating people and getting them the vaccine in an amazingly short amount of time. And I know that you spent a lot of time and effort and kind of looking at how we got that and applying some of these principles. Can you talk a little bit about what you discovered in the paper about how functions and individuals work as opposed to just putting the right people around a problem rather than forcing the problem to go through a bunch of silos?
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Yes, so the paper to which you're referring is based on work we did trying to compress the time to develop drugs. And just to jump ahead and get people's attention, the phase we were looking at typically is a year or more, and the pilot got it done in 6 months or fewer. So, and not only did they get it done, there was a whole lot of things we said this was much better, was done faster, better results, blah, blah, blah. All right, so what was the takeaway there is that we tend to organize ourselves by our specialty. And there's good reason for that. Don't get me wrong. I'm not going to be like throwing darts at silos, right? Because, you train people within a specialty, mechanical or electrical engineering or finance, whatever else it is, and you hire people that way and you promote them and evaluate them, et cetera, et cetera. So that's how we gauge people's professionalism. The other part is that when we start trying to think about putting people into groups, it makes sense to go around a professional discipline because you get critical mass, maybe economies of scale, et cetera. The problem is that we don't get solutions by people just expressing a single discipline. It's how the disciplines come together. And what we found is that with all the intent, all the attention that people pay towards the quality of the professionalism within a silo, less clear was how the different pieces of work fit together. And that became, as we start explaining in the paper, the real Achilles heel of the organization. Because in the absence of a sense of how work flows place to place to place, then it's hard to say, if, let me put it more particular, if you and I don't understand that we have a connection and dependency towards some other common purpose, then we don't have shared priorities. And so, in the paper, let's say you're the biologist, I'm the chemist. So then what goes on in the biology lab may be asynchronous, disconnected from what's going on in the chemistry lab. But things get even worse from there, because once we lose that sense of system priorities, then I'm sitting in chemistry, with my other buddy chemists, and we each do our own thing because there's no larger set of priorities into which we plug in. And what you end up seeing is, this is especially true for conceptual work. And back in the 70s and 80s, we realized this is true for manufacturing, or kind of this job shop approach, is that on the one hand, it appears to promise economies of scale, critical mass, flexibility, agility. And anytime you looked at these job shop setups, whether it's for physical stuff or conceptual stuff, huge amount of inventory on hand and very little stuff coming out the door on any given day. And so in the case of these folks with the pharmaceutical company, what they did was the lead chemist said, no, first let's map out the flow of work so people can see where they fit into the larger whole. With that done, then people could start saying, oh, that's the larger whole. Let's start talking about what we should be working on first and second and third. now that we're talking about what happens first, second, and third, I'm explaining why I think what should go first, and you are. So now we're having sort of like these thought experiments, and really digging into our rationalization for a point of view. So even before we do anything physical, we're already running experiments. Anyway, the paper continues to spill out this series of cascading changes in conversation, collaborative conversation, that come about by creating this much more focused view of the flow of work. Now, tying this back to the COVID thing, it's amazing. I mean, everyone will tell you that if you go back to January, February, March of 2020, and people's prediction of vaccines, I think the predictions were 2022, not 2021. And even that, they thought that was like crazy, but at least we have an answer for the press. Now, my suspicion of what happened with COVID is that these companies told their scientists, this is our priority: advance on our understanding of the disease and advance our understanding of how to create a vaccine for the virus. All right, so boom, now that created this opportunity for productive collaborative conversation, because once you and I agree it's COVID, then we say, well, what should we do first? Then we get into the conversation. Well, I think this, you think that. All right, let's go back and forth. Oh, regardless of whether we agree with you or with me, we both come away with a better understanding. And then when we're looking at the different things we can do in front of us, we say, well, which one is slowing us down? Boom, that one. And so my interpretation of what happened with COVID and why we got vaccines so quickly is this focused, this temporary focus. Now, what I hope is that these pharmaceutical companies learn that once they get past the COVID vaccine, that this is a good way to organize, that this is just a productive way to organize, and that they shouldn't say, oh, well, we're no longer worried about COVID, that they're actually better doing temporary focus on a problem and get that through the pipeline, and temporary focus on the next problem and get that through the pipeline, and on, rather than this sort of disconnected approach that's more typical.
No, and so it's if you have, and talked about in the paper, have two pharmaceutical companies, A and B. They have the same equipment, they have the same access to capital, they have the same they have the same problem that they're trying to solve. But the difference between the successful unit and the less successful unit, not unsuccessful, but less successful unit, is they took those scientific and technological capabilities and then overlaid them on the management system, overlaid them on the people system.
Yep. 100%. That's
right.
And
in a highly complex world, they're still seeking to simplify the work, right? How do we simplify it?
That's right. And again, it goes back to sort of the advocacy, in the 80s of why there was a guy at Harvard, Wick Skinner, who wrote this paper in Harvard Business Review called something like Focus Factory. And he was talking about, fabricated assembled parts. But he said, if you're going to make something, don't confuse people by having all sorts of different jobs and programs running through different isolated islands of specialization. He says nothing will ever get done because the person over here will pick up project A and the person over here B and C and D, and you'll have lots of work but no output. He said, commit your factory to something. And he didn't say, you had to build this thing like, that it should look like Henry Ford's original creations where you can make things fast but only one thing. He said, no, that's not it. But at least for some period, commit to the thing you're trying to get from start to finish and get that out of the pipeline. Then you can reconfigure and then get that through the pipeline and then reconfigure again and get that through the pipeline. And in fact, Chris, thinking out loud a little bit, when you look at Henry Ford, he tapped into so much collective genius about the speed of a single thing through a pipeline. And even the Toyota folks speak and write with great admiration for his genius and being able to do that. I mean, from raw material to a car in 3 days. What the problem they were dealing with is they couldn't justify a system that big because they couldn't make and sell that much stuff. So they took kind of the speed thing and they went from, I guess, from velocity to acceleration. They said, well, if Ford worried about the speed through the pipeline, we're going to worry about that. But in addition, we're going to worry about how quickly can we switch the pipeline from one purpose to another. And that's where you get this single minute exchange of dies and these rapid changeovers, et cetera, et cetera. But you know, to Toyota's credit, you know, if you can do a rapid changeover, you change from one focus flow, click, to the next focus flow, click, to the next focus flow, click back to the first focus flow. And the whole idea of having these simple focus flows is they allow the collaboration to be way more productive than that kind of job shop layout.
And you don't have people running around wondering what to do next. They know exactly what to do next. Right?
Yeah,
exactly.
Right.
So, you know, one other thing about the paper that I wanted to highlight for you is you raised a great question about how the public sector defrayed some of the upfront costs are from an R&D standpoint for those companies to get a better ROI. We could do an entire podcast episode on different problems that we could solve by getting a little bit of public sector help for the private sector with that problem.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you what, though, you know, there's I think a lesson there. So just to sort of unpack that thing, one thing that's really quite remarkable is not only did we get a vaccine in a year, but we got several vaccines in a year. You know, we got the Moderna, we got the Pfizer and the J&J, and to that, you say, well, how did that happen? And I think, and I just, you know, that's a huge caveat. Anytime I say I think, it means I'm not really sure, but I'm going to say it with great authority. So I think that Operation Warp Speed had a big part of this. Because you think about the decision making for your typical pharmaceutical executive. They look at a situation and say, man, you know, I think people would really be appreciative if we could develop a therapy for that ailment. Good God, you know, it's going to cost a lot of money. It could be $1 billion. And we don't know if we're going to even succeed with the $1 billion. That's a lot of risk. And, you know, and I got to really think hard about the gambling. And what the government said was, you know, so you think about the economics of pharmaceuticals normally, which is you get paid by the pill, right? And that's great if you succeed, but if you fail, you know, you spend a whole lot of money with no reward. And I think again, that's a big caveat. The Operation Warp Speed, what it did, it told the pharmaceutical companies, hey, Chris, don't worry. We're going to pay you for your bench time. We're going to pay you for the time you spent under the hood trying to invent stuff. And look, if you invent stuff, that's fantastic. We'll be delighted. We'll buy it. We'll sell it with, you know, Walgreens, CVS, the Heinz Convention Center, whatever. We're going to sell it. But if you don't, you're not going to be throwing away that time and that money. We're going to eat your development time. Now, and I think that's why we see so many pharmaceutical companies trying, you know, not only creating a business, but there are all those others that tried and didn't, but they're not crying now and, you know, and licking their wounds because they got paid for the development time. Now, I think there's actually a more general lesson in that. And here's where it goes, is that I think our natural inclination is to think about how we pay or charge for the part, you know, whether it's the examination in a medical practice or, you know, the part coming out of a factory. And what we forget is that the stuff that we actually accept and say thank you, there was way upstream this whole phase of development, design, exploration, experimentation, whatever else. And that the people who do that, we have to give them time. That's what they need. And when we look at them, our question to them shouldn't be, what did you make today? Our question to them should be, what did you learn today? Because that's really that's the value they're creating. Unfortunately, I'm not sure that even within most of our own organizations, we realize that we have to ask people not only what did they make, but what did they learn? And you know, I think the Operation Warp Speed and the COVID thing suggests that more attention to we're going to pay you for what you learn versus pay you for what you make is hugely liberating for those people whose job is to actually experiment and explore.
Switching gears here, Stephen, is you've got a new project, C to
Yes.
Solve. Do you want to share with our listeners C to Solve and kind of how that can help them?
Yeah. All right. So I appreciate the prompt. So this C to Solve is a piece of software. Where it comes from, it's inspired by the work and writing and research and et cetera that I've been doing over the many years. As we've been talking about, is these folks at Toyota and some of these other real standouts, they build management systems which are based on feedback, which is whatever you do, make a some kind of declaration that this is the right way, or you think it's the right way, but discover very, very quickly that things aren't going as you wanted. And there's a lot of reasons for that. Because it's not going right, why do you want it to go? If it's not going right, why do you want it to go wrong twice instead of once? Why do you want the prompt to linger in the system? Why do you want to unleash all these sort of pathological behaviors of workaround, firefighting, coping, et cetera, if things go wrong? What we discovered is that that's all well and good to say, but there are a lot of work environments where it's hard to do. And so, you take the classic example at Toyota with the andon cord. Some associates doing some work, misfires, strips a bolt, reaches up, pulls a cord, and seconds later, a team lead comes over and says, "Hey, Chris, what's the problem? How can I be helpful?" That's fine in that environment where the associate, has maybe a range of motion of 10 or 20 feet. But you start getting into workforces where the workforce is distributed. Think service crews, for example, or just in a hospital, clinical staff all over the place, or not only distributed but mobile. So there's no, it's like, oh, yeah, I have a cord when I'm here, right? And so how do they call for help? And the answer is, typically they can't. And if they can't, what ends up happening is the problem which is afflicting them, there's no relief. So that's a problem for them. But the other part is, you as manager of a system, you don't know what's actually going on. The factor is becoming hidden to you in terms of where people are succeeding, where people are struggling. And because of that, you get blindsided, because you only find out about difficulty when it is really flared up to something intolerable. So anyway, we wanted to solve for that. So what we did is we created some basic sort of apps. It sits on a phone, a tablet, whatever, but we put it at a natural place in the flow of work. So if someone goes over to a machine, to run a job, and he doesn't have the right equipment, he doesn't have to find anyone to look around. Just tap, 5 seconds, take a picture, and immediately something pops up on engineering support saying, "Hey, Mariano over here, he can't complete his job. He needs your help right now." We've had this at Walter Reed Hospital. Nurse walks into a patient room, looking around, where's the medication they need? Well, the nurse could go look for it. It takes a lot of time. The nurse could look for something else that's kind of dangerous. They're not even allowed to do that, actually. They could call a pharmacy. What's the phone number again? Or the nurse could go over to the tablet on the wall, go tap, I'm in room 303. I'm missing this medication. Boom, and the pharmacy knows right away. And the whole idea behind this particular tool is to create visibility. That the person who has responsibility in a supporting role, let's say like pharmacy or specialty diet or engineering support, or the person who has responsibility for the system, that they have real-time rich visibility as to what's going on. And because they have real-time rich visibility of what's going on, they know where to direct their attention and their resources to make things better. Anyway, if people want to check it out, we've got like a little do-it-yourself version on our website. You go to ctosolve.com, click, you got it up and running on your phone. You can play with it. And if you like it, let us know. We've got different levels of sophistication on the tool.
Yeah, and I'll put a link to that in the show notes for this episode, where people
Thank you.
Can go find out about that. And you're also talking about you're building a body of knowledge. You're learning where problems are happening over again, so you can solve them and not say. As my dad would say, told me growing up, says, you need to learn a different mistake because you've got this one down pat. So it's the same thing.
Yeah.
So kind of trying to wrap things up here. What do you consider the most important thing that you've learned in your career so far?
It's a good question. I think the most important thing is to be able to say, this is what I think, why I think of it, but I'm likely wrong in some way. So how can I find out what it is I'm wrong about and find that out, faster, easier, safer than not. That's a hard, if you think about how we progress through life, most of our advancement is by having the right answer. And this approach to management is premised on the idea that, all right, you have the right answer. That's good. But what we really are worried about is where we have wrong answers. And I'll tell you, whether it's in my professional life, writing stuff and handing it to people and saying, all right, tell me what you hate about it, and being comfortable with that. Who the hell is comfortable and say, I sent something to someone, I joke with him, he was at a time, it looked like he marked it up with a crayon. He says, he faxes back, not faxes, he scans back to me. First page, I don't understand this, redo it. And somehow I'm supposed to be appreciative of that after I worked a month on that paper, and I had to say thank you. And not only did I have to say thank you, I had to mean it. And I think I meant it. I think I did, but it was hard. And so, that's been the hardest, but perhaps the most important thing to learn, to say, I don't know, I'm wrong.
So I know that we talked about obviously your favorite book is going to be The High Velocity Edge, or Taiichi Ohno's book that you have got right there. We also talked about some of the work that Gene Kim is doing in the front. So is there anything that as far as books or knowledge or places that folks can go learn more about what he's doing and how to apply it with what they're doing?
Yeah, so quick background, this fellow Gene Kim we mentioned, within the manufacturing community, he might not be well known. Within the DevOps community, he's like, everyone knows him. Gene wrote a book called Visible Ops and the DevOps Handbook and the Phoenix Project. The guy's been like a bestseller. I mean, he's created this huge community around these ideas. And the reason I recommend people go over to see Gene is for a point you brought up earlier in our conversation, which is kind of the realization that these ideas apply in lots of different situations, because they really are about managing the collaboration of people towards common purpose. And they're not about the making of fabricated assembled parts or heavy industry raw materials or anything else like that. So what Gene has done is he's taken a lot of these ideas. His earlier work was just re-express them for a bunch of people who cared nothing about factories. So one of his early books is like he took the goal and rewrote it for IT nerds. And I say that comfortably because I think that's actually how Gene explained his book to me. But what Gene has done a beautiful job is that because he's going from one domain into another, he's got to be really careful. What he can't do is he can't just simply transport the tools because they may not make sense in that community. So Gene has worked like unbelievably hard and very productively to take the tools, understand the principles, and explain to people how these principles apply in a place very, very far afield from where they got created. So anyway, check out his website is IT Revolution. He's got some good material. He's got fantastic interviews. Some of the most recent, he interviewed this guy, David Silverman, who was a co-author of the book Team of Teams with Stanley McChrystal. He interviewed John Richardson, who was the most recent chief of naval operations, before Admiral Gilday. He's got some good people who are willing to talk to him. So, and again, I think for our community, it would be really like a great set of insights to see how someone from outside of our community takes our ideas and explains them to people who wouldn't otherwise even give them a second thought.
So, well, Steve, I appreciate you spending time on the podcast today. How can people connect with you if they want to learn more about what you do or if they have a question for you?
Oh, that's fantastic. So I think the easiest is, look, in my book, we say, this learning dynamic is premised on seeing problems and solving problems. And so our software we created is C2Solve. And so that's where you find me, just spelled out SEETOSOLVE, C2Solve.com. And you'll see some materials there, email address, the do-it-yourself demo, et cetera. That's as easy as anything.
Okay. Well, Steve, I appreciate your time. Thank you for your contributions to the continuous improvement community. And I appreciate you sharing your thoughts with our listeners and with me. I know I've learned a lot. I've got a lot of great notes here, and we'll make sure that there's links to everything that you shared with us in the show notes page.
Oh, you bet. And Chris, first of all, you're welcome. I'm glad But let me say thank you also, because you think about what we've been talking about, which is what we're fighting against is this view that the world is an inherently limited place, and that what we have to do is force people to make trade-offs, A or B. And I think what we've learned in this, this multi-decade journey of continuous improvement is that we are so far from any theoretical limit on what we can actually do that we should never really worry about the trade-offs. What we should worry about is the discovery. And you're spreading the word, man. You're on the top. You're on the top of the hill, yelling out to people. No, there's a better way. There's good news about this. There is a better way. So thank you for that.
Yeah. Well, there is a better way, and I'm glad that we've had a chance to share that with folks. And Steve, thank you.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
All right. Bye. I really appreciate Stephen for giving his time to be a guest on the podcast. Make sure to check out the links on the show notes page, and if you want to be notified when new episodes come out, subscribe at the website leanleadershippodcast.com. Make sure to catch next week's episode. Until then, seek progress over perfection. Thanks again.